Sent ara. Bona tarda. Us donem la benvinguda de nou, potser, perquè ja fa uns dies que va, la tercera Biennal.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this Biennal del Pensament. We have 6 days of events, and as always, we encourage you to peruse our hand schedule, our hand program, and the online program, because there's many activities, and if you're interested in today's event, you will probably be interested in others. This is just like the first edition, this third edition of this biennial, and because it's 100% on site. The second one was during the pandemic, but now we are together again, we are face to face, and we're so excited to go back to normal. And today, in the second to last day of this Biennale, we have 2 panels here at the Plaza de la Virreina, and in this first one, in the aftermath of the pandemic, we want to discuss how technologies have captivated our health, and also what have we waived, what have we given up on the way. And for that, we have 2 speakers who will be speaking in Catalan and English. We have simultaneous translation service. You can grab your headsets by the entrance. Just leave your ID there. So we will have Catalan channel 1, English channel 1, Catalan channel 1, English channel 2. And we have Darian. Meacham. He's an expert in ethics and innovation. He's also a specialist in political philosophy and technological philosophy at Maastricht University. And he will be discussing with Manuel Armayones. He's an expert in persuasive design, in digital health, and he's in the lab on research at the Open University of Catalonia for network research and social research. And at the end of the session, we will have 15 minutes for Q&A, so that you can also participate in this event. So we encourage you to think up some questions for the end. And the person who will be opening the panel is Begoña Román. She's an expert in applied ethics, and she's a member of Aporia, Contemporary Philosophy and Politics. This is a research group at the Government of Catalonia. So Begoña, whenever you want. Good afternoon, everyone. And according to philosopher Hans Jonas, in his very interesting book entitled The Principle of Responsibility, he wrote this sentence which really gives us a context of today's topic, living in technologically healthy societies. And he said, let's discover what's at stake, or we discover what's at stake when we discover what's at stake. So basically, we value things when we lost them, or when we're losing them. During the pandemic, we saw how important it was to be able to use technologies. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to go on with our communication, with our work, but at the same time, we saw the negative part of it. I work on ethics, and I try to escape very judicial, punitive, impositive, reactive vision of ethics. I like to remember that ethics is a reflection on good life, actually, and a good life is a life devoted to research on good life. So today we cannot carry out this research in a technified society without technology. So it's about realizing the dangers, risks, and having preemptive measures to prevent those in this digitized society. But at the same time, we need to see and focus on the potentialities we can get from it. If at the same time we link this with the concept of health, generally speaking, we would say that health is the condition that makes possible the research on a good life. So it would be at least troublesome for someone to intentionally wanting to be ill forever, sick forever, and not wanting to invest on health. That would be weird. So if we have a universally shared value, that is the wish to be healthy, right? And technologies can make a contribution on that. And we will realize that with Manuel's reflection, but they can also technologies, they can also contribute to realize a more society with more solidarity with vulnerable people, with ill people, diseased people. So, Dr. Meacham, you have the floor to tell us about this great word, solidarity, but in digitized societies and in the sphere of public health. Public health meaning just the health of the population, and we often talk about utilitarianism and utility, maximum happiness for the maximum number of people, but we don't talk so much about solidarity in terms of public health. This is why his presentation will be so interesting. Go ahead.
So much. So it's really a pleasure to be here, to be invited here. I've been enjoying some of the great sessions the last couple of days. And so it's my pleasure to talk to you today. I'm going to try to make some short preliminary remarks that hopefully then open up for discussion and debate. And as you said, I very foolishly offered to talk about the sort of interrelation between these three topics. So solidarity, public health, and digitalization. Once I started to think about it, I realized, yeah, I need like 20 hours, not 20 minutes to do this, because it's a really, really great and rich question. And I think we can sort of start to unpack it also in the discussion. But what I'm going to try to do here is unpack a little bit of the basics. And I'll start with health, and then I'll talk about solidarity, and then by the time I get to digitalization, hopefully we're in a kind of snowball effect, where I'm talking about all three at the same time, and then we can move into the discussion. So we know very well, as you just said, right, that health is one of the, if not the most important factor in our well-being, both as individuals and as communities or as societies. And I think it's really important to say from the outset also there are many different ways to be healthy, right? There's not simply just one model of health and one model of happiness, for that matter. And when we do research that explores different ways of being healthy, different experiences of health, and also different experiences of happiness, what we find very quickly is sometimes our intuitions about what is a healthy state and what is a relationship between a healthy and a happy state are disappointed, right? We see that people with impairments that we think, oh, this must be a really serious impotent, obstacle to their health and to their happiness, say, no, actually I experience my life as perfectly healthy and perfectly happy. And this tells us, of course, that health is not just about the person themselves, not just about one individual, and certainly not just about one individual body, but it's about a broader relationship to an environment. And it's about a relationship to a social environment, to the people that we surround ourselves with, to the people that care for us and that we care for, and of course also to a built environment, right? It's about how it is that we're able to navigate the spaces around us. So let's just say health is a really tricky idea to pin down. I'm not going to try and pin it down any more than what I just said. But I think it's safe to say, and I think everybody's in pretty broad agreement, that healthier people are happier people. Healthier communities, and yes, whether we measure this on the aggregate, healthier societies are happier societies and are more flourishing societies. And because of this, nearly all nations, all regions, all cities really devote significant resources to trying to keep their populations healthy. And of course, they do this in different ways and to different degrees. And we also probably can agree that some countries or some municipalities, regions, however we want to think about it, could or should do more for public health or do things in a manner that is wasteful or that is perhaps unjust or inefficient or with the wrong priorities. But across the board, the social value of health is not questioned, right? And that's why every single political institution is somehow involved in trying to make their populations healthier, not just for the well-being and for the happiness of the population, important to say, but also because healthier populations are more productive economically, right? And poor health, and especially high levels of chronic illness like we're currently seeing in rich societies, are a huge economic drain on regional, urban, national economies. So that said, we also know that national healthcare systems, we hear this, I think probably every day, or at least we hear this in where I live every day, national healthcare systems in Europe and around the world are under really increasing strain, right? So COVID, of course, made this much, much harder, but already before COVID, public health systems were really feeling the squeeze due to an aging population, a population that is living longer, sometimes living longer healthier, but not always living longer healthier. There is a real rise of chronic disease within aging populations, also within younger populations. Sometimes we refer to these as lifestyle diseases, so it's diseases that have to do with the way that we live our lives, or the ways that we don't live our lives as well. So the exercise we do or don't do, the things that we take in, the cigarettes we smoke or don't smoke, and so on and so forth. And we know also, of course, that as medical technology advances, healthcare becomes more expensive, right? And so some of the amazing technologies that we're using to more effectively fight illness and to keep people healthier for longer periods of time also are really expensive. And if you look at these graphs, especially in Europe, of healthcare spending, it's right around the age of where people retire that suddenly healthcare spending per capita goes like that, right? And we end up spending per capita much, much more on maintaining each individual's health and well-being. So that's my kind of spiel about, the situation of health in a nutshell. Now, historically, one of the most effective mechanisms, and maybe I shouldn't call it a mechanism, probably we can discuss that, for improving public health or for guaranteeing public health are what I would call institutionalized forms of solidarity. Great, solidarity, it's wonderful. But what do we actually mean when we talk about solidarity? And I get the feeling, we were talking about this just before we came on stage, after several decades of dormancy, right? Several decades where we were really assured that the market was going to be able to deal with these questions about well-being and happiness just fine. Solidarity, so solidarity really kind of fell out of fashion in politics. I don't remember it at all discussing solidarity when I was at university studying political philosophy or growing up. I grew up in the US, so maybe that had something to do with it. But suddenly, I feel like we're hearing so much about solidarity from all sides. So this idea is like back with a vengeance, and we talk about local solidarity, we talk about regional solidarity, we talk about national solidarity, we talk about European solidarity. Great, but I think there's a big but there, and I would try to come to it. Sometimes you feel like in times of crisis, there's a realization amongst politicians or amongst the political elite. They say, oh yeah, what about solidarity? Oh yeah, if we look here in the European treaties, we find solidarity is this fundamental European value. Great, we need more of it, we need it now. How do we get it? Oh, and what is it, by the way, right? So we have this, I'm a grumpy philosopher. And so I think sometimes, we go a little bit too far with this new, we've gone too far the other way now with this sort of solidarity overload, or at least this talk of solidarity overload. And I need a little bit of clarity on what we're talking about. And so for now going on 3 years of the COVID crisis, we're hearing about solidarity for vulnerable populations, so for the elderly, for people with chronic illnesses, people with pre-existing conditions, solidarity with medical staff who have really been pushed to the brink of exhaustion, the brink of collapse in this situation. Solidarity with the key workers, the core workers who keep our community, who kept our communities running. Solidarity, we started talking about solidarity for the food delivery guys who are riding their bikes around. Solidarity, but do we want to give them a different status of of employment contract? No, we'll just say we're in solidarity with them, but we don't really want to pay employment taxes and payroll tax for them. So we have all this talk about solidarity. Now, of course, we have this shift to solidarity in Ukraine, solidarity in turning down the heat or turning down the air conditioning, solidarity. So I've never seen so many calls for solidarity from politicians, from billboards. I ride my bicycle down the streets of my neighborhood. There are sheets out the window of people's houses, solidarity for X, Y, or Z. This is great in a certain sense, but it also leads to a lot of questions and a lot of problems. And I think to make things even more difficult, sorry, I'm a philosopher, so I get asked questions and I just make things much, much more difficult than they were initially, right? So to make things more difficult, everybody seems to want solidarity, right? So solidarity isn't any longer the property of one side of the political spectrum. Across the whole political spectrum, left, right, extreme right, everybody is in favor of solidarity of some sort or another. It's become like these concepts of peace or justice. Everybody wants it. Everybody wants more of it. But once we start asking about what it means to be in solidarity, what's required of us, who should be in solidarity with whom, how much solidarity is it something that we could even measure? How then should we enact it, right? Can you have too much solidarity maybe? Then things start to get really, really, really messy, I think. And of course, you watch the news and you see that the same politicians who are one day saying, well,
You know, the most solidaristic thing we can do in Europe is, you know, those countries that have been profligate with their public spending, well, they should learn their lesson the hard way, and that's the best thing we can do for European solidarity. And the next day, the same politicians are saying, you know, energy solidarity across Europe, we need to share resources, we need to share. So it's a term that can be used in all sorts of different ways, and oftentimes also at cross purposes. And I think that makes it really, really tricky. So let's try to be, I'll try to be philosophical for a moment at least, and I'll try to think, okay, what are we really talking about when we talk about solidarity at its core? And here's what I think, so this is my definition of the term. Solidarity is a willingness to bear a cost, right? It's a willingness to bear a burden or to take on some risk for someone else. And we're willing to do this, we're willing to bear this cost, this burden, this risk, because we think we share something relevant with those others that we're taking on this burden for, taking on this risk, this cost for. It could be that we share a neighborhood, it could be that we share a city, a country, a nationality, or it could be, and oftentimes if you talk about, you know, think about the way solidarity is used in the broadest sense, it could be that we just share the fact of being human and having vulnerable bodies like all other human beings. But fundamentally, I think what's at stake when we talk about what's shared in a solidarity relationship, what's shared is a future, right? So whatever it is, this thing that moves us, it has a kind of force. And that force makes us willing to share this cost, to share this burden, to share this risk. But it's not very easy, right? And if we want to extend this idea of solidarity beyond our local context, right, beyond behaving in solidaristic manners with the people I come into day-to-day contact with, then we need political institutions and we need political mechanisms in order to do it. And I think it's really important to say also that, I mean, there are some people who will say, oh, solidarity is not about self-interest. I'm not against self-interest, right? So actually, I think, you know, very often this sharing of burden, this sharing of risk, this sharing of a cost in the name of sharing a future together is of course, it's in our own self-interest, you know, whether it's in the long term or in the short term. And I don't even really think it makes sense to talk about pure self-interest, because we never really act out of pure self-interest. There are always others who are implicated in our actions always affect others, and our actions are always affected by others as well. So I don't think solidarity is, it's neither purely about self-interest, nor does it exclude this notion of self-interest, right? We take on this weight, we take on this burden for others for something else as well. And here's what I think is really important, and here's also where I think a lot of people disagree with me, and also why I'm really skeptical about these kind of easy, what I would say, easy declarations of solidarity, whether it's with frontline workers or with people suffering from a, you know, as a result of a natural disaster on the other side of the world. I think for it really to mean something, solidarity has got to hurt, right? I think it's got to hurt at least a little bit, right? It doesn't have to be, you know, overwhelming. In fact, it shouldn't be overwhelming. Otherwise, we don't enter into these kind of relationships. But I do think solidarity's got to cost us something. It doesn't come for free, right? I think one can show support, one can show sympathy, one can show love. And I think that's all wonderful, and one can do those things without paying any price. But I think solidarity always has to have a cost. It has to be, it involves us bearing a kind of load or bearing a kind of risk. And when we bear this burden, when we bear this cost, when we take this risk upon ourselves, that also, you know, another's risk upon ourselves in the name of solidarity, I think what we're doing it with the understanding that if they were in our shoes, they would do the same. So I think for me, these two elements are super important. So on the one hand, that solidarity's got to hurt a little bit, or a lot sometimes, right? And on the other hand, it's got to be reciprocal, right? Solidarity is always about at least the possibility, the possibility of imagining that this could be a reciprocal relationship. And that's why I'm really skeptical of this, you know, solidarity with people on the other side of the world. I think we can show sympathy, we can show care, we can show love, we can send resources and money, absolutely. Solidarity, I think, is something slightly different there. And I also think this is why solidarity binds us to others, right? It's not about pure self-interest, it's not about pure altruism, it's about the foundation of a community that can equip itself to face the uncertainties and the risks of the future. And I keep using these terms, uncertainty, risk, and future, and I think this is like the key constellation when it comes to talking about solidarity. What does solidarity allow us to do? Well, it allows us to face the future not alone, not isolated, not terrified, but together in communities. And so, okay, I think solidarity involves a cost, it involves a price, so to speak, and the reward is that we're able to look forward into the future. The reward is that the risks, the fears that I feel are somewhat mitigated by these relationships. And I think that this has historically been the most effective way that people and communities have addressed the uncertainty of the future. Not simply by trying to minimize risk and avoid harm, but also by engaging in collective projects with one another. So solidarity is not, I use the term risk and harm and minimizing, mitigate a lot. It's not just about that, right? It's also about the possibility of a collective project of the future that we share with others. And for me, this is absolutely, absolutely central to this idea. And of course, we go forward with others. We know that there's danger. We know that there's risk. We know that there's uncertainty, but it's somewhat lessened by the fact that we're sharing it across. It's mitigated by this fact of I'm not the only one bearing this cost. I'm not the only one bearing this risk for this project I'm trying to engage in the future. And in this way, I think, and leads back to what I said in the very beginning, that suddenly, solidarity is back in fashion. Solidarity isn't a nice to have in my position, right? It's not like, oh well, we can have a society and then hopefully we can also have some solidarity as well. I don't think it works that way. It's not something that's just politically useful in times of crisis. It's really central to our notion of living together and living well together and facing challenges together. Now, of course, when we talk about solidarity, and I think it's already come out a little bit, we talk about solidarity, we talk about it at different levels. So we can talk about it at the individual level, the level of individual action, at the level of group action, and at the level of institutionalized action as well, at the level of political institutions. And we can see how these different levels are mobilized at various times. And it becomes especially clear, of course, during times of crisis, how these different levels of solidarity can be mobilized in different ways to respond to these crises. Sorry, this fly around me, yeah. What we see increasingly now, so that's my solidarity spiel, right? So now let's try to talk about how this is involved, how digitalization and how our use of digital tools is involved in this. And I think what we see increasingly is that, like all aspects of our lives, the ways in which we are able to engage in these solidarity relationships at individual level, at group level, but also at political level, right, at the institutional level, are increasingly mediated through digital tools, and I use that term really broadly. And we can also say increasingly mediated through practices of collection, storage, analysis of data as well. We might want to put it that way. And I think we can come up with lots of good examples for this, just to illustrate what we mean by this. If we think of the COVID track and trace apps, so I don't know if you had a specific track and trace app here in Spain, or you still have it maybe. We had one in Belgium. I guess we still have it. I don't use it anymore, I would admit to that, right? But so these apps were rolled out during the COVID crisis, and the essential purpose of these apps, of the track and trace app, I'm not talking about the green pass or the vaccination pass or those, but the specific purpose of the track and trace app was to encourage a certain form of solidaristic behavior at the individual level, right? So we had the institution of this tool at the political level, and it was meant to encourage a certain type of behavior at the individual level. At least, so I only know the Belgian case, so I described to you the Belgian case. If you were in too close contact for someone, I suppose they all worked more or less the same. If you were in too close contact for a certain period of time with someone who was infected or had tested positive from COVID, and I think that person had to have entered that into their app as well, so there was responsibility on them as well, then the app nudged you to get tested. It nudged you pretty strongly, right? Didn't force you, but it nudged you pretty strongly. You have to do this now. But of course, you could just delete the app and turn off Bluetooth and pretend you never saw it. But it nudged you strongly to get tested and, of course, to stay isolated until you had your test results. So I think that this was a form of solidaristic behavior that was being encouraged, that was being digitally mediated. To make it happen, we needed a digital tool, right? We needed our phones, for one thing. This thing that we carried around with us all the time, right? We needed a piece of software, of course, that connected us to other phones and gave us the alert. And there was a cost to pay, of course, right? You had to go and get tested. It was a pain, right? I did it many times. Once it was positive, but many times it was negative, and it was a big pain to do it. It was a burden I had to bear. However small we might think it was still a burden, right? And then you had to stay inside for a long, for a few days while you waited for the test results. During the sort of height of the pandemic, you had to wait longer, so you had to stay inside. You had to figure out how to arrange your life, right? But there was a hope, and maybe that hope was somewhat unfounded at points, that this behavior, this cost-bearing activity, mediated at all these different levels, so mediated technologically at the institutional political level, but also at the individual level, was also being reciprocated, right? That it only worked if everyone was doing it, and that's actually why it didn't work that well, right? But the idea was that this would help us to manage the crisis, right? This would help us to improve public health, actually. And of course, that's a really specific example of digital mediation of public health tool to encourage a certain type of solidaristic behavior. I think, of course, the best example of solidarity practices at the level of public health are the very existence of our public health insurance systems. So the existence of our public insurance systems, these are solidarity institutions, right? And I think oftentimes that when these mechanisms, when these practices of sharing risk, of carrying burden for others are institutionalized, and also when we're in a sense coerced into them, right? I can't opt out of our public health system. I have to pay my taxes, right? Then we forget also that at its core, these are also acts of solidarity, and at its core, the idea behind a public health system, the idea behind public health, right, which emerged more or less at the same time. This idea of public health emerged more or less at the same time as the idea of a public health system. These are fundamentally ideas about solidarity and about how it is that communities, cities especially, could face future together, could face uncertainty, could face change together. Okay, so I think we need to ask now, what's the role that digitalization, I gave one example, which was the COVID track and trace app. I'll come back to that at the very end. What I gave that as a kind of positive example. So I think we can also ask, okay, what's the role that digitalization is having here? And are there risks, right? So is the increasing mediation of our relationship to our public healthcare system, our relationship to health, full stop, our relationship to our city governments or to our institutions, is this mediation introducing some risks vis-a-vis the notion of solidarity? I think so, yes. I think there are some serious risks. I also think there are some really hopeful possibilities. And actually, when it comes to the application of digitalization in health and data-driven tools in health, it's one of the areas of digitalization, one of the areas of, let's say, the datafication of our society where I'm the most hopeful, right? It's where I see the most real possibility for progress being made. Okay, so I said there are always some risks involved, and I'll try to name, I think, like 3 of those risks, and then I'll try to end on a positive note by naming 3 of the positive aspects. So I think that the use of large medical data sets in public health applications has great potential, and we can go from we're suddenly able with it's much easier to do this, right? To do what's called drilling down. So we can go from aggregate level health data about a population, and we can try to look for correlations between individual level data and aggregate level data. And on the basis of this, we can see what treatments might be appropriate, what risks are more salient for particular individuals, and so on. Of course, we need to understand that the correlations we find when we do this are not causation. This is often a common mistake that we made. And we also need to understand that the term that we often use to describe this idea of personalized medicine, is somewhat of a misnomer. It's not really personalized medicine. It's just better group stratification. So we're able to understand the general population in a sort of more fine-grained way in terms of these stratified groups. But at the same time, I think there's real possibility here. And I know that so far I said I was going to talk about a negative, and that's all positive. But so here's the negative side. I think the more that we know about risk at a group level or at an individual level, in other words, the more uncertainty that we're able to eliminate, the less likely we may be, and I say we may be because it's speculative, I'm not sure, the less likely we may be willing to contribute to these very broad, very general risk pooling and risk sharing schemes, which is what our public health insurance essentially does, right? It pools risk, we share risk. I'm sharing health risk right now with, not all of you because you're not, well, I'm in another country. I'm sharing health risk as we speak in Spain with all my fellow Belgians, right? And I worry a little bit that as we start to understand better and better the risks associated with our particular lifestyle, our particular genetic makeup, we don't even know, right? With the risks associated with some other random factors that we're not aware, we might become less willing to have this general sharing and general pooling of risk. And this is a concern that I have. Although I think this is a kind of extension of the idea of, why should I pay for the health care of somebody that has a really unhealthy lifestyle, right? And I think that actually there are good reasons why we should still do that, right? We shouldn't abandon that idea. But I have a fear, I have a sneaking suspicion that we might be entering into a situation where some of those motivations that we have are being undermined a little bit. And this brings me to the second risk I see, and I think this one is probably pretty well known to everybody. It has to do with who's collecting, who's processing, and who's owning all of this data, right? So all of this information that we are constantly emitting, giving freely for the most part, right? We all hit accept terms and conditions 25 times, if not more than that, a day, right? If I go back and, I've been using Google Maps for the last 3 days to navigate Barcelona, every step is tracked, right? Every step is feeding the data machine. And I think that, of course, we have to understand that, big tech companies are going to be involved in this collection of data. If I look at the brand name on my phone, the brand name on my watch, that's obvious and it's useful, right? I'm not sure there's a way in which they can't be involved. But we have to figure out how it is that we can involve them, how we can extract that utility, while at the same time maintaining public health interests. Because companies are companies, they do what companies do. They're not working in the public interest, they're working to make profit. And that's what companies do. I accept that, that's absolutely fine. So we need to figure out how it is that these big tech companies are going to be able to contribute to public health, which they really want to for obvious reasons, right? Without them becoming controlling, let's say, and without them being able to dictate the research questions, without them being able to dictate which data gets used and from where. And I think this is going to be a huge, huge challenge as we go forward. And that links really closely to the final risk that I see, and that has to do with this increased use of data for public health purposes. We also risk increasing what generally gets called the digital divide, right? We risk increasing that globally, of course. We risk increasing that within Europe, but also within regions, also maybe even within cities as well. And digital divide here no longer just means access to infrastructure, to hardware, or to software. Digital divide also means where the data is coming from, right? It's no longer just a digital divide, it's a data divide. And if resource expenditure and resource targeting is more and more closely tied with where there is good data, where good data is coming from, then being able to provide that data, being able to process that data, and owning that data is going to play a very big role in how resources are targeted and how resources are spent. And of course, we see big tech again coming and really looking to fill this gap, right? Really looking to say, we can provide all of this data that the state needs or that researchers need. Just let us have the data, right? So let us collect the data, we do what we want with the data, and we'll give you that data, right? It's not even about them selling the data, it's about they have their own use for the data. And I think, again, we really need to figure out how we're gonna balance this, because we don't want a situation where, again, there are questions of justice and questions of inequality that come up here. We don't want groups of the population, portions of the population, to become data poor in this way, to become poor data emitters, right? I walk around just emitting data all the time, but probably most of us do, right? So there's a lot of data about people like me, about my demographic, right? And the more data there is about my demographic, the more research there is. The more funds can be targeted at dealing with the kind of chronic illnesses that my demographic has, for example. So we risk this kind of data disappearance, maybe. Okay, very briefly, I'm a little aware of the time. I say three things about, those are three areas to be vigilant, and I say three positive things. I think we're seeing really positive developments on some of these issues. So when it comes to questions of data ownership, for example, I think we're seeing developments where patient groups are taking the initiative, are working in a solidaristic fashion to collect data from their patients, right? And these groups are cooperative groups, they're mutual support groups, and they're saying now to researchers, look, we have all this data now that we've collected from our patients. We're willing to let you use this data, we're willing to give you this data, but we want a say in the questions that get asked. We want a say in the research that gets done. And I think this idea of data cooperatives is really, really a fruitful one, and is going to be super important going forward. We've also seen, I think, amazing results, good results. We've seen some really positive results when it comes to diagnostics. We see the capacity for making diagnostics using big data and artificial intelligence. That's another area. And last thing I'll say, and then I'm getting the "you've been talking for way too long" sign. The last thing I'll say is that we talked about the COVID apps earlier, but I think we're seeing real possibilities for ways to positively influence people's behavior. And one of the biggest drains on healthcare, on our healthcare systems, are people who don't follow their treatments through. I'm guilty of that sometimes myself, right? Did I take that pill? Did I not? I'm not sure. And, you know, if we're able to, let's say, nudge people in positive ways, I think we're going to find this, my mic is falling off my face. If we're able to nudge people in positive ways, I think that's going to be a really positive development also. I will stop there. Thank you so much for your patience. I ran on way too long, I'm sure. But
Thank you. Manuel, de cara a...
Okay, Manuel. So, in order to create this future, groups and collectives, we need will. And sometimes everything related with the health system, it's not only health. We need to have this willpower. You talked the other day. You need a little bit of effort. It must be a little bit painful, but some people really have problems. How technology can have an influence on persuasive design. Thank you very much. What a pleasure to share with you both. Thank you very much for such an interesting presentation. Well, we have a problem. We have a problem when dealing with health. One of the main issues, it is that majority of people, we do not follow. People do not follow. 50% do not follow the prescription made by physicians or made by the system when they recommend you that you have to walk more, a healthier life, eat better. That's quite an issue. But, you know, the problem at the end of the day is that all these people, well, creates a lot of expenditure in the health public system. This goes against the idea that we are getting some services in such a manner that we should be co-responsible, and due to many issues we are not co-responsible. This creates a lot of pain, personal pain, for those not following the medical and the therapeutical adherence. It's one of the biggest problems that we have in the public sector. Organizations such as the WHO and many other, such as the United Nations, they are thinking about it. They are thinking that they have to work much more towards these behavioral insights, how to understand much better why people behave the way we behave. But how to respect our own health, how to follow the prescriptions, the system to change our behavior. This has been already solved in other fields, but not in the health field. Let me talk about a little bit of technology to clarify. We all have a cell phone in our pockets, and we adhere and we have this habit to use the cell phone. So we continuously use the cell phone to look for Google Maps, to count the amounts of steps we made this day, to read the WhatsApp messages. So the technology industry already solved this kind of problems. How? It was possible through techniques and very long theoretical models that can be resumed in an word, which is catalog. It is to put together psychology, influence techniques with technology in such a manner that the cell phone will be able to change our personal behavior. We'll think, well, I will never change my behavior. I never change the way I behave. Well, I left my cell phone behind. I don't want to feel tempted. But any one of us, if we listen to any message like this beep beep, so if we get this WhatsApp, for sure, we will have this habit, we will have this reflect, right? The same that we had to take a pill or to follow the medication that the physician told us to follow. And very, very rapidly we'll say, what happens? Beep, beep. So we feel the urge, we have the need to know, to reduce the uncertainty through knowing. And rapidly we will have a look and we'll have a pleasure, like a download of dopamine, because I know what Begoña is writing to me, I know what's in the message, so I'm happy. So this idea to create an habit made our research team in a very stupid manner. You know, it was a very silly situation. We say to ourselves, we spend loads of public money in loads of public projects. Our research team in the Catalan government, well, we have funds. But you know what happens? Okay, we have a mobile app to promote health and nobody downloaded it. Only 4 people. The family, your friends, well, 4 students that, well, I have in my classroom, they are happy with us, that they feel that we are friendly, but we never reach to the people. The question is, how can we reach people and how apps make people to be hooked to apps? So, Begoña, well, said it before, the big corporations in Silicon Valley know very much that this will, it's not something very common. We need to create a habit. Every time that we get a signal, we need to offer a response. This is what our grandmothers did with the pills. I do recommend you, if your doctor says, you have to take this pill. Okay, you put next to the coffee machine in the morning, you put a post-it in the fridge to recall you that you have to take the pill. This is what people in Silicon Valley learn to make us and to get the habit. Well, I had a class, there were only 2 university teachers. We were with them for a meeting, and we asked them, how do you make this possible? And I thought that they will offer me a secret manual. But they gave me this. This is what they gave me, right? So if you have a dog, you know what is that. It's a clicker. It's a clicker, yeah? Many people that were not listening to me, look at me when I made the nose. When you click it, you have this signal. The dog knows that he did it very well, and, well, you didn't have to give him a trick or a candy, whatever. Anyway, this is the principle. So you must create habits. This is the challenge. Habits do not belong to the will of people because these are automatic behavior. We made this possible without thinking. That's why we try to learn about the big ones, the big corporations such as TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Google. What do they do? And we want to apply it in public health projects. All right. I have a question for the 2 of you. Let's see. Okay. What kind of ethical principles each and every one of you in your own domain or field of action, or what kind of criteria do we need for today's world, this globalization, to get these habits that will contribute to be more, to get more solidarity, not only emotional solidarity. Of course, we could create some emotions to have more solidarity. What kind of actions we could introduce in technologies for them to be in line with this new future? If you have an example in mind, let's say, let me tell you, when we talk about the future, we have the dystopic discourse. There is no future when we talk about the digital things. We cannot be naive, but how to create technologies that will encourage people to get involved, right? And to make lose more to the ones that have more. That's why it's very difficult, and not to trust anymore to those that do not have because they believe that they do not have because of the others, right? So what kind of criteria we could have? in technologies for them to be aligned towards this ethic and solidarity in society. Because in your specific case, Manuel, what's the difference amongst non-proper influence and manipulation and persuasion? What are the difference amongst these two concepts? Or not being paternalistic or maternalistic, hey, behave yourself when we say these kind of things? These are questions, right, that we must answer. Go ahead. Well, we always talk about influence, persuasion versus manipulation. The difference, it is the next one. When we manipulate, when a big corporation, a big tech corporation makes us to be hooked for hours and hours all along the feed, yes? Mr. Rosenstein that invited this logo of like, this was the guy that changed the behavior in the world. Also, the one that invented the infinite scroll also changed the world. But these people never ask us if your aim in life it is to lose half of your life. We are not going to count the time that we lose and the hours looking at ourselves. And this is manipulation in the end, because they want you to be hooked. The most time, the better. The more data, more money. It's only business, guys. So, what's the difference? Because some of us from the academia and we as researchers, we want to talk about influence techniques and persuasion techniques. Well, in manipulation, I try to change others people's behavior, to take advantage for the other to buy, to give me data, to have data of his or her personal life. In persuasion, I do design an intervention together with the individual, collaborating with the group of patients, and we did it. We did it in several projects. We collaborated with all the patients to understand what was their aim, such as increasing the level of adherence. Therefore, we will help them with an ethical committee, with informed consent, and Begoña, you are an expert in this sense, and to help the others to reach these goals. If they don't want to reach this goal, well, they are free not to reach the goal. So in such a way, we cut this paternalistic thing. But just a comment. When we deal with this paternalistic thing and when we work such as with the theory of nuggets, Laggers, Kellerman, Nobel Prize of Economy, they talk about this libertarian paternalism. So the idea will be the next one. Very stupid example. When we face the possibility, such as people to eat healthier, I can put in a nursery or in a primary school the fruit closer than cakes, right? You can pick a cake, but you also have the fruit closer. So is this influence or not? Well, it was possible to demonstrate that boys and girls that went by, if you put the fruit this way, they take more pieces of fruit than a cake. So obviously we have to ask permission to make this possible, but these are possible solutions. And I stop here. Thank you. So it would be more efficient not to put it closer, but maybe cheaper. Fruit should be cheaper. Absolutely, I do agree with you. There is a saying, it's much more powerful your zip code than your genes. Depending on your income, you have more or less power. And something that I would like to share with you, there was a pediatrician, Sonia Dendreu, that said, obesity is the disease of the poor. That's clear. And this is something that we saw in the news. Okay, let's buy healthier food and let's buy junk food, right? And those that cannot afford to buy food, they buy junk food. That's where we have to intervene. The thing that changes the behavior, it is the context, and we have the social and the economic context. 80% of the factors for health are social factors. That's why we talk back again to solidarity and this moral resource, right? To contribute and to reduce the risks of those that do not have enough money due to this lottery. Damian, what's your purpose and what do you think? What's your goal for technology? Any proposal?
I think the explanation that you just gave is really, really spot on. And of course, I'm a philosopher, so I use sort of more useless abstract terms, but I think the really important one here is autonomy, right? And I think what you're talking about is there's a difference when we are persuaded to do something that we also think is in our best interest, or that we have agreed to do, that we have agreed with this course of action, but we need some persuasion, we need some push. We can say we remain within a sphere of autonomy. We're doing what it is that we want to do. We retain control over our decisions and over our decision-making capacity. When we're in a situation of manipulation, it's someone else's goals that are at work, right? And I think we might say, oh, but we want to manipulate people to be healthier. We want to manipulate people for their own best interests. I think it's a really, really dangerous idea. I mean, philosophically, politically, it's a dangerous idea, and also it doesn't work very well, right? So I think when we go into these situations, I work a lot with designers and with data scientists, and we go in often we want to build a tool, we want to collect and analyze data. We go in with an idea of what we want, right? And if we stick just within that framework of the idea of what we want, we usually don't get anywhere, right? Or we end up with a tool that doesn't work very well. When we seriously take into consideration the needs, the values of the people who will be the end users, the people who will be the data subjects, it's not easy, and there's a lot of lip service that gets paid to these ideas of co-creation and co-production. These are big terms that get thrown around, and of course we write them all the time, and we're not really sure all the time what we mean. But I do think that if we're honest with ourselves, we know that when we work together with users, with stakeholders, and I don't like that word, but okay, it's this kind of word that stakeholders, we hear it so often, right? But there are people who have stakes in the games, right? I mean, and those are the stakeholders, right? And maybe that's, we have to figure out, in a way, everyone has stakes. And so we have to figure out who do we include and who do we not include? And that's a really, really difficult task as well. And we have to make sure that we don't just include the usual suspects. We have to make sure that we are, taking into account the views of, let's say, the data poor, as well, so the ones who are usually not feeding in to these processes. But if we try to get that alignment, and if we really take this notion of autonomy seriously, and so if you look at, there's like, I don't know, last time I checked there was like, 194 different codes of AI ethics, and then there are these sort of meta-analyses that get done. And they say, okay, these are the 7 principles that are appearing in all the codes, and autonomy is, top of the list in pretty much every one, but it's usually not very well fleshed out what that means actually, right? What does it mean to allow people to be autonomous in the way that they're using a tool that is meant to persuade them? Right? And I think we need to, philosophers don't solve problems, we make them more complicated usually, unfortunately. But I think we need to figure out how to create these spaces of autonomy for people, where they feel voice, where they feel heard. These are sort of, now cliche terms about representation, stakeholder input, but they can actually mean something. And when you see people working on the ground, when you see urban planners work, when you see people who, I hear kids running all around us screaming, right? When I work with people who try to take kids' voices into urban planning decisions, it works, right? It really, really works, but you have to be able to connect with them on the level that on the language, on the level that they're speaking. You have to really make this effort to understand what their values are. And I think that's absolutely central. That's what you said in slightly, less eloquent terms, but.
I do totally agree. The autonomy is something basic. The autonomy understood as the power to decide how I do want to live, what do I want to use, what I want to do. It is true that sometimes the social determinants make this very complicated and tricky. But let me tell you something. In 2016, in Shanghai, the highest WHO experts were together to think about a healthier society. What do we have to make possible to have a healthy society? And someone could think, well, more doctors, more psychologists, more physiotherapists, more health systems. And amongst the participants, representatives also of the patients, they agreed that they wanted healthier cities, physically cities, possible to walk, possible to bike, to have this kind of meetings like today's meeting that are very important to face solidarity, the possibility to be together and to create together. And also they talked about the governance in that meeting. We need governments that will take into account the people's needs, right? To be together and to create. And finally, the literacy. Everybody must be literate in health. We need to know everything about health, everything that has to do with the obvious things. So this literacy, it's not only to know where's the information, the quality information in social media with apps, and to have our own criteria, where to find the quality information, to understand the information that will be written by citizens, not only medicine specialists, able to value this health and also to be able to take decisions. And finally, just let me tell you that right now we are having a collaboration with the Spanish Society for Digital Health. It's quite a big society and association, and they have a model which is quite important. Digital health based on values. So many times we have video calls, we use loads of apps, but these apps must help us, must help the user, the patient, the citizens. Citizens, they must feel that they found what they really want to find, and it's useful. Digital health based on values, not only in business. That's important. And let me ask you the last question. And we'll have a question and answer conversation with the audience. So the concept of solidarity is painful, as you said, and thinking about in a collective project for the future, but it's not, the stakeholders are not there, because we need to talk about the future generations, kids that are here. They always impress us with the presence of the kids, but if we need a much more persuasive solidarity model, would be the system to make the effort, I'll say, and to reduce, to make possible that the future generations will respect this sustainability concept. And this goes together with the idea that digitalization also pollutes. In such a way, I'd like to ask you, what concept of solidarity and what kind of a persuasive design will need to respect future generations that are not in this planet and they have the right to come to this planet in better conditions? How can we work this with persuasive design and with the philosophical concepts? Darian, you have the floor.
I have 2 minutes to answer that question or something. So, I mean, you know, this question of solidarity with future generations is a really difficult one. And I don't know. I think we can probably look to some idea. We can imagine our relationship to future generations, and maybe that's. I'm not sure how it is that we can have solidarity in the sense that I use that term in a strong sense with future generations. You know, I can't remember who said it. There was the expression, you know, the unborn have no voice. Which I think it was Hans Jonas who said it, actually, right? Or the unborn. It was, you know, and so. It's really difficult. And at the same time, I think we can, you know, I talked a lot about the future, and I talked a lot about uncertainty, and I talked about solidarity being a way in which we orient ourselves towards the future. And when we do that, we imagine possibilities, right? And we imagine better worlds, right? We don't always imagine. We often imagine dystopias, but we can also imagine better worlds. And of course, I mean, when we work together with children, we see that absolutely, you know, present, that their lives will extend beyond our own lives. And our project of solidarity with them means not just the, you know, the extent of my own life, but it means the extent of their lives. And then from that, I think we can even take one step further. It means the extent of, you know, it goes on. And I think we can try to think about this concept of solidarity in an imaginative way like that. In terms of, you know, sustainability, and digitalization, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we talk about the benefits of digitalization, we talk about the drawbacks, we often don't talk about the question of sustainability, the question of the ecological impact of digital technologies. And we know, of course, at the European level, the policy discussion around the green transition and the Green Deal is really closely linked to the policy discussion around the digital transition, digital transformation, and how those two things conflict with one another doesn't get discussed that much. I think in terms of what data ethicists are doing and what a lot of practitioners and people who are collecting data are doing, are practicing this principle now of we need to really try to reduce to the greatest degree possible the amount of data we collect also, right? That has to do with data ethics, that also has something to do with ecology as well. Of course, we need less processing power. And so we have these things like, you can think about the mantra of the environmentalist movement, reduce, reuse, recycle. Well, we can take the same attitude towards the digital, of course, right? We already think about how we can reduce the number of, the amount of hardware, we can recycle hardware. I was in a great session yesterday about, extracting materials from buildings, but it's the same with data, right? It's the same. So we can also reduce the amount of data we need to use. We can make sure that data is, the FAIR principles, that it's findable, it's accessible, and it's interoperable, right? And that it's reusable, right? And so I think these all have some role to play in how we think this question of sustainability in relation to the digital.
Jo estic completament d'acord amb...
I do totally agree with you. And basically, I'd just like to add something because time flies. How to encourage technologies, right? We must encourage technologies. Technologies should be a mean, not a goal. This is something that we developed with the municipality of Barcelona because we are working to face loneliness problems in citizens, and well, something that really works very, very well when we talk about persuasion, we must show who we are, to be outside, right? And what happens with these intercontinental flights, these kind of simulations, how the future would be, this really helps us to be aware of it. And something very stupid, and it seems silly. Sometimes it's very difficult to reach agreements with these huge corporations. We, the world researchers, should be open towards the rules and also to have access to the big databases. The information that these huge tech corporations have are humongous, and it's also hidden for researchers. They tried it in the US, but it was not possible. Maybe now we are in a better shape to, be able to get this goal. Hans Jonas said that the success of the prophet, so the ones that always thinks about bad news, the success of this prophet is in the prophecies to happen. So let's think about what we don't want, right? And to make all the measures that will be needed for the worst not to happen. Now it's the moment for questions and answers from the audience. We do have microphones. We have a mic runner for you.
Sí, aquí davant. Bueno, aquí. Micròfons?
Hi, my name is Elaine Genzer, and I have a question for Darian. You said that solidarity is something that you need to feel some pain, not only an emotion, but something to connect to the other that you're having solidarity to. And it's easier somehow with people that are around you, your city people, your family, and etc. But talking about sustainability and climate and change, how can maybe use digitalization and technology in order to have solidarity to future generations? Because maybe you're not feeling the pain right now, but we know the pain is coming. So a question about solidarity in the future.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I don't think I have a very good answer. I mean, when I say, you know, solidarity's got to hurt a little bit, I don't think it has to hurt emotionally. I think actually it's the opposite, right? It's in terms of emotions, I think it's probably a positive emotion to be in solidarity with other people. I think it hurts in that there's some cost in it for you, right? But you think that cost is worth it. I mean, I think that's, and also I said, there is an aspect of self-interest involved. You think over the long term, it's gonna be a gain for yourself, for the people that are around you, for your community, for the people that you're in solidarity with. Now, of course, you said, and that's really important, that it's much easier to have those kind of relationships with people who are local to you, with people who you are in everyday contact with, and that's, I think, very obviously the case. On the other hand, we live in a modern digital, whatever post-industrial society. I don't have that much contact with my neighbors, for example, with the people in my locality, unfortunately, right? And the other day, so I was in the process, I ran into a neighbor outside, and he said, oh, there's this, you can join this neighborhood group, there's an app, you have to download the app, blah, 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 right? I said, okay, I'll do that, so I downloaded the app, and now I'm in contact with all these people in my neighborhood. And a lot of it's very superficial, right? A lot of it's, some questions, some this, some that, does anyone know when there's no parking? But some of it's like, my pediatrician said I need this over-the-counter medicine for my kid, and there's a rupture in the, in the stock. It's not available. Does anybody have some? And people respond to that, right? So I think that's a good example of how we can use digital tools, even at the local level, right? In a contemporary society where we are really short on time, we're short on energy, we're running and running, So I think all these things are the case. And I suddenly had this, wow. We can use these digital tools to do this. And then I'm in a WhatsApp group from my composting club, right? And it's really the same sort of thing. It's like, ding, Sunday afternoon, gotta go to the compost, but I do it, right? And I come into contact with these people that I wouldn't otherwise come into contact with. Now that's still at the local level, right? But I think, why not think about this on a broader level as well? Solidarity with the future generations who live far away, who are really going to be the ones who pay the price in 30, 40 years for the havoc that we're wreaking on the planet. That's really difficult. I think we can try to do it imaginatively. I think we can try to reach out. We can try to listen. We can try to hear stories. I think art becomes a really important medium through which that can try to happen. And I think that, we went from talking about public health and now we're talking about climate change. The two are really closely linked to one another because climate change is going to have a really terrible impact. I shouldn't be laughing. I laugh to sort of keep away the terror, right? Climate change is going to have this really horrific impact on public health. And I think we need to find ways to make connections, exactly as you said, outside of our local community, outside of our regional, outside of our national community, so we don't end up in this kind of typical lifeboat mentality, right? Where our aim is to try to build the lifeboat and pull up the ladders around us as quickly as we can, and what happens to the others, well, we're sorry, that's terrible, but there is nothing we could do. So I think we need to try to build those kind of relationships where we share common projects. And we know there are lots of ways in which we try to do that. Some of it works, some of it doesn't work. Where we have face-to-face contact, it works better, but we can probably try to find more digital ways to mediate that kind of contact, to create relations. I don't have an answer, but it's a great question.
¿Més preguntas?
I'm interested if you guys have something interesting. This is a fantastic question. So
okay, is a short idea. Perhaps could be very interesting to write a diary or book explaining then to the next generation what we are doing in this moment, what are our pitfalls, our mistakes, our failures, or worries about, and perhaps asking them for apologize for the world that we are living in.
Sí, yo tenía una pregunta.
Yes, I do have a question too. When I was listening to Darian speaking about solidarity as a mechanism to build healthier societies, I was imagining, an extreme society with a very strong community fabric, with a very powerful network in which people cooperate and help each other. I'm talking about an extreme situation, right? That would be the extreme example in which they solve most of the problems they have together. And I was wondering whether the role of the state in such a society would change with regard to what we have today. How would a state behave in that kind of quote-unquote perfect society?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I mean, you know, I think I try to dodge your question because it's too difficult. It's a really, really great question, but I think the issue is, yeah, how does the state become a mediator for these kinds of relations, for facilitating these kinds of relations? And I think also there's a little bit of a question, and that relates, I think, a lot to what you do as well. What is the appropriate level of subsidiarity, right? So what is the appropriate level at which we should try to foster certain types of relations, right? Is the national level still the appropriate one for a healthcare system? Should we look broader than that, maybe, or should we look narrower than that, right? And of course, when you were telling the story you just told about this sort of idyllic future community in which there's very high levels of cooperation and high levels of solidarity, you ended it on a kind of positive way. I had a sort of negative, vision after that. As there's a risk of exclusion as well, right? So we can become so tight knit, we can become dependent on each other in such a way, we can become so solidaristic with one another, and I think that's the dark side of solidarity, right? That we say to others who we say, sorry, you're outside of our community of solidarity. We'd love to admit you, but you haven't really put in the time or the effort. You just got here. I don't know. You seem to share different values, different characteristics than we do. So that's, I mean, for me, that's the kind of dark side of this idealistic notion of solidarity, and I think we need to constantly be vigilant about that. And maybe that's, I mean, I think that's one of the roles of the state, perhaps. I don't know at what level exactly. We think we need to think about that in the, what level is most appropriate. But to make sure that we remain open to others, right? Solidarity is about the creation of community, but often we have this risk that once the community is established, once the community is created, that we somehow shut the doors on it, right? And I think that relates a little bit to the first question as well. So that's the only answer I can give to what is otherwise, a fantastic question that is kind of the big question, I think, in political theory and political science. What's the future of the state?
Well, if you allow me, I would like to add something. A big difference would be understanding that in such large communities as the ones we've got currently, the state cannot make decisions from a party-based ideology, but from a much wider and a broader ethics than the one that could emerge from the parties. And this, places priority on a number of a set of contents that, regardless of the parties, we shouldn't be discussing and fighting again, because otherwise it's like we are in the Groundhog Day all over. So, any more questions from the floor?
¿Ahora?
Sí.
Vale.
Yes, I would like to say that, well, you were saying that people can be manipulated and the difference between manipulation and persuasion. So if a person is addicted to, social media and he or she cannot escape, it's like whenever they listen, they hear the beep, they have to switch on their smartphone. How would that affect? How would that impact future generations, given that individuals who are addicted to their phones in an unconscious, in a subconscious manner, would make people around them, their children and so on, also develop that kind of addiction to their phones? And same thing could be applied to any kind of technology, not just smartphones, but any other, technological stimuli. So maybe that could be harmful for future generations as well, right?
Muy pertinente.
Well, that's a good question, a relevant question too. We would need a whole new session for that because it's so broad. But anyway, the principle that follows is that of slot machines. It's you know, they keep you addicted, and it's no secret. And when you've got a gambling problem, there's of course a psychologist, colleagues working on that. He can treat that. But beyond individual treatments, and some techniques actually work, the most significant thing would be to come up with a social reflection. When we talk about smoking, for instance, they say smoking kills you, or with drinking, you know, drink wisely, or with gambling, lottery is not a game. But the tools which are designed to keep you addicted, you know, digital tools, they never say anything about that, about these potential addictions. And that's a reflection we should come up with. And it has to do with open algorithms and with us understanding how they do it. Where's the secret, right? Of course, they don't want to open that discussion, you know, the big industries. Okay, so we'll try to end this with the help of two philosophers. One is Ortega Gasset. In a paper of his, he said, ideas, you can have ideas, but you are in beliefs. You don't have beliefs, but you are in them. And at this point, living in technologically healthy societies means that we have to believe we can build our future and give reasons for hope. And this has to be done also through the media, and not just saying that technology is guilty of everything and be technophobic, which is not going to help. And then we've got David Hume, a Scot from the 18th century, who along the same line had this beautiful sentence, and he said, he understood this, and he said this rhyme in English.
Reasons to believe que les raons per a viure són raons per a creure.
So reasons to live, reasons to believe, and we need to believe that it's up to us to create technologies that make circumstances possible to research good life. So thank you very much, all of you, for being with us here today. I hope you liked it.
Moltes gràcies, Manuel.
Thank you so much, Manuel. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Moltíssimes gràcies a tots tres per haver...
Thank you all three for sharing your reflections. Thank you everyone for being here. You can actually stay. You're invited to stay because in a few minutes we will have the second and last panel of the evening. So if you don't have anything better to do and you want to stay, in a few minutes we will be discussing new digital rights or how to guarantee human rights in a connected society. See you in a minute.
Moltes gràcies.